A warm welcome to all of our friends out there in the Bosshole Transformation Nation. It is good to have you here. This is your co-host, John Brewer, and that means in a little bit I'm going to be joined by the remarkable, amazing, my friend and business partner, Sarah Best. And this represents the first in a series of episodes that are going to showcase the 17 reference profiles from the Predictive Index. Now, for years, all of our listeners, you're familiar with our conversation around behavioral data, the validity of behavioral data, and what we use is we use the Predictive Index for that. But we've talked about reference profiles, and we thought it would be of benefit to showcase each and every one of those, not all in a row. We're going to drop these in here and there for the next several months. But learning more about the reference profiles and specifically helping managers and supervisors build that self-awareness so that they can stay out of the Bosshole Zone. You can go into the show notes. Anybody can go in there and go to the link and take the behavioral assessment. We will send you your one-page reference profile description, all for the benefit of building that self-awareness. So where are we going to start? We're actually going to start with the Collaborator. That's the reference profile we're going to talk about this week. And the reason we're starting with the Collaborator is because it represents the largest reference profile in terms of the human population. So settle in and let's learn about the Collaborator. The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Well, Sarah, here we are. We've got a special series of episodes coming up over the next couple of months focusing on the PI reference profiles. Our listeners have heard a lot about it, but I'm kind of excited about diving into each one of these as we go through the next few months.
Sounds like a good plan, John. What do you got for us today?
Well, we're going to talk about the Collaborator reference profile. And we're going to do it in two ways for each of the reference profiles. We're going to look at it as a manager. If you're a manager and you have the Collaborator reference profile, but also if you have collaborators as direct reports. But the main thing is, because we're trying to help managers and supervisors stay out of the Bosshole Zone, if you're a collaborator manager, what are your superpowers and your strengths? What are your potential traps and kryptonite? And how do we help you avoid the Bosshole Zone? Now, if you don't, as you heard in the intro, you can go into the show notes and get your reference profile. There's a link in there to be able to do that. But we're going to talk about the manager as a collaborator.
I had a question, though. Why this reference profile? Why are we starting with this one?
Oh, that is a great question. And I totally overlooked that. Thank you. It is because of the 17 reference profiles, the Collaborator represents the highest percentage of the human population. It is at about 11.36%. I said about. It's 11.36%. And I mean, of the millions and millions of behavioral assessments that PI has done over the years, in their study, collaborators represent the highest percentage, which is, again, a little over 11%. Thank you for reminding me. That's a very important point. So what's a collaborator, Sarah? Tell us the description we like to use.
John, a collaborator is a friendly, understanding, willing, and patient team player.
And, we talk a lot about drives, needs, and behaviors. How about if I share a little bit more about where those drives typically end up? And bear in mind that there are different types of collaborators and different intensities or degrees of high and low factors. But collaborators typically have higher patience, which means they work at a more moderated, slower pace, perhaps. That could be a little bit challenged when it comes to change or abrupt change. They also have high extraversion, which makes them one of the social profiles of the 17 reference profiles. Mm-hmm. But their lower factors are their dominance and their formality, which means they tend to be more harmony-seeking and collaborative, hence the name. And also lower formality means they have a lower drive to conform to rules and structure. So having a lot of rules, a lot of detail, sometimes can present a challenge for the collaborator manager. So with those drives in mind, what are some of the needs and behaviors that we typically see out of collaborators?
Well, John, collaborator as a manager include freedom from individual competition. So, as the name collaborator would suggest, these are not people whose ideas have to win. And they do not feel the need to be in competition with others. They don't like to be in competition with others. It's a connection and a relationship thing. They also need the opportunity to work with and through other people. That's where they really where they do their best work is in communion with others. They like a supportive work team. They need to have that encouragement and supportive work team. And last, I would say freedom of expression. So because they have what we call lower formality, they like to put their thumbprint on things. Like there's a way I like to do it. You don't necessarily have to tell me how to do it. Maybe give me a picture, but let me create and express on my own.
Don't hem me in with a lot of rules and structure. Give me some of that freedom. Okay. And the behaviors that we get out of that are things like being cooperative, empathetic, patient, and casual. So as a manager, as a supervisor, if you are a collaborator, this is your hardwiring. This is your behavioral DNA, or we could even say your leadership DNA. But what we really want to dig into to help managers, collaborator managers stay out of the Bosshole Zone are talking about things like signature work styles, their strengths, their common traps, and how people can best work with them. And this self-awareness is critical. So let me talk a little bit about signature work styles. And signature work styles in our world is broken down into 4 areas. It's communication, delegation, decision-making, and action and risk, how they deal with it. So the thing about communication is collaborators tend to be very open, approachable, and persuasive. That higher extraversion, they get excited about being able to bring people to their idea or their perspective. So that persuasion is something that's very natural. And they also tend to be this is something I struggle with. You already know this, Sarah, because of their slower pace, tend to be a good active listener. Now, on the delegation side, because they are so people focused, they will delegate authority and details very freely. And actually, delegation is a great skill. A lot of managers struggle with this. Collaborator managers, that should come pretty naturally for them. And when it comes to decision making, it's related to that. They bring people into the decision making process. Now, as we look at other reference profiles, you'll see that some of those managers are very much about controlling that decision making and controlling that authority. They may delegate details, but they find it hard to give up authority. Not true for the collaborator. To your point, they truly want to pull people in and share that responsibility. It's interesting, though, for collaborator managers when it comes to action and risk, they tend to be a bit risk averse. Now, that sometimes you may get collaborators that are a little bit more comfortable, but with that lower dominance and lower formality, they tend to be a little bit more responsive than proactive. See what's happening, kind of. That is definitely true for collaborators. Evaluate what's happening and then respond to it. You and I are not wired like that. As a persuader and a captain, we're very proactive and very comfortable with the risk. Collaborators are not that way. So as a manager, sometimes managing and overseeing and developing other people can provide risk. And you may find yourself hesitant to take action until you fully understand what's going on when the circumstance may require that. So that's where that adaptation comes into play. But as collaborators, managers who are collaborators, they deal with this action and risk in a very different way than people that tend to be more comfortable with risk and proactive. So, Sarah, let's talk about the strengths that collaborator managers naturally have that they bring to their teams.
Well, it won't surprise you, John, that they're very collaborative.
Right.
Not to overuse that term, but the things they work on, the things they attempt to accomplish, they do that in partnership with others. And they believe in the strength of collaboration. It would make sense to me that if they encountered someone who appeared not very collaborative or someone who was selfish in their work, they might have challenge with that. But their strengths include that people orientation. So highly sociable, very quick to connect with others, and very externally focused. So aware of, probably more so than some other reference profiles, they can be aware of the needs. They can read the room more effectively because their focus is outside of themselves. Lastly, with that high degree of patience, they can do routine. They can do a repetitive work. They can stick consistently with a workflow or a routine and really be fulfilled by that, which
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that myself.
Yeah,
Sounds
you and
really,
I don't have that. That's right.
it sounds interesting, but not the way I work. Yeah.
I admire that. I can't do it. Well, and that goes back to that higher patience. Remember the patience drive. We also talk about pace, and collaborators, along with some of the other reference profiles with higher patience, tend to work at a more slower, more moderated pace. So that routine, which sounds, is very challenging for us, is something that they gravitate toward and that they really appreciate. Now, with all of that, and we're talking about some really wonderful capabilities and traits of a collaborator, or as we would say, their superpowers. On the other side of that, there's the kryptonite, and those are the potential traps that collaborators can find themselves experiencing. Sarah, do you want to show the other side of that coin of potential traps? And this is actually where collaborator managers can find themselves drifting into the Bosshole Zone. So what do we know about that?
Well, John, I think we would refer to these as common traps. Maybe you call them that. The first one, which is in relationship to their collaborative nature, lower dominance, higher extroversion, not very happy to rock the boat. So they may have difficulty sharing, unpopular news or sharing bad news or saying no to colleagues.
For those listening that find themselves in that position, that's tough for people, within those social reference profiles. I mean, collaborator along with promoter are in what we would call the teamwork and employee experience grouping. And oftentimes they might just constantly find themselves saying yes. I mean,
yes,
because you never want to disappoint anybody. So sharing bad news, sharing unpopular news can be very, very difficult. Nobody loves to share. Well, maybe there are a few, but nobody seeks to share unpopular news. This weighs heavily on a collaborator for sure.
It does. It does. Yeah. And I think along with that, there's lower formality, which means less attention to detail. So follow through and follow up may not be a strength for the collaborator pattern.
Yeah.
One of the other common traps, John, is that they can appear to be too casual. I suffer from that same potential trap where I have informality. I'm very casual with people. I try to make it easy for people to approach me. But in that space, collaborators can be, little boundaries, saying maybe too much at the wrong time and in the wrong place.
Oversharing maybe sometimes.
Oh, there you go. That's a better word. Oversharing.
But I think that's an interesting distinction where we have the tendency to be informal, as does the collaborator. It's just that because of their more responsive nature you and I are highly proactive, so we can be informal and drive things forward. This informality is also backed up by somebody who said, it's okay. We'll be fine. We can just kind of take it easy, take it slow. So if we don't know this, if a manager doesn't know this about themselves, if that self-awareness is not there, and it clearly isn't aware to their direct reports, this can appear as being unconcerned. That informality and sort of having a laissez-faire approach where internally this person may care very, very much. It's just not being demonstrated that way. And that's why we do this. That's why understanding your reference profile as a manager specifically is so critical.
Well, John, I might ask you this question.
Yeah.
How do I work with a collaborator colleague on my leadership team? So I'm a manager. I have another manager who's collaborative and very different from me. What do I do to support them or work well with them?
Great question. So if you're teamed up with a collaborator, you've heard us use the word a lot. You want to let them collaborate. Now, what does that actually look like? They like to communicate, like to be involved and with others. And so if you don't share that trait in common with them, you may find, wow, why do they want to talk so much? I don't, they want to sit down and review this and talk about it. But that's what a collaborator needs and wants to do. Show them compassion, love, understanding. They want consistent, dependable management and support from team members, from their managers. So, to exclude them, to ostracize them is is something that will weigh heavily on them and have a really negative impact on a collaborator. Same for promoter as well, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that
Yeah.
eventually. And the other part too is keep it friendly, because collaborators, they have a need for freedom of competition. They don't see work as a competition, and some people do. If they feel like there's competitive pressure, that will not bode well for them. I think that will diminish their capability. So, as a peer, as a colleague, if you're on a team with a collaborator, these are the things that are going to help you work well with them. And what will also help you is your own self-awareness of your reference profile.
Absolutely. And I think, if I'm a high level leader and my managers, I'm working with my managers, and one of those managers is in fact a collaborator, I would do well not to have them work autonomously. I would be in partnership and in communication with them. And I would not place the burden of decision making solely on their shoulders, because that collaborative leadership style or management style would be such that working through decisions with and through others, with other people, reduces the risk.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Oh, that makes total sense. That's a great point. That is a great point. So one of the other things, and because we've covered all of this detail about the collaborator manager, just sort of turning the table and thinking about if you have a collaborator as a direct report, these same characteristics apply. So all of this about the collaborator manager, super helpful. But Sarah, let's turn the tables a little bit. If you're a manager and you're coaching and developing a collaborator, and by the way, don't guess, again, you can find out by using the link or have your direct reports use the link in the show notes. How does a manager best work with a collaborator direct report? What are some of your insights on that?
Well, I think the first thing is to remember they're friendly, understanding, willing, and they are a patient team player. First of all, motivate and recognize. How to motivate and recognize a collaborator is going to be very different than how you motivate and recognize a maverick or a venturer, people that have opposite kinds of drives.
Okay.
A supportive work team, a stable environment as much as you can, shifting priorities and rapid pace change, those are very much here to stay. We know there's challenge that can arise from organizations that kind of move their deck chairs a lot, if you will. So any kind of stability, continuity, a routine and a process and a protocol that are sustainable, those things go very well and do very well for a collaborator. Encouragement and reassurance. Here's the interesting thing. For the collaborator to hear, wow, you did a really great job on that, or I really appreciate the process you used and the way you engaged other people in this decision making. Being recognized for that stability, that thoughtful consideration of others goes a long, long way. So the worst thing you could do is ignore a collaborator, or, like, I don't need that feedback, so I'm not going to give that to this person.
Right.
You want to be able to support and encourage them and say, what do you need from me? You're doing such a great job. I appreciate these specific things. Oh, and by the way, here's something you could improve upon. If I like where you're headed with this. So it's a safety zone. And it comes from this place of understanding and encouragement and support. Like, no matter what you do, I have your back.
Good.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about how to motivate and recognize? You don't want to single out the collaborator and like, oh my gosh, Suzanne, you did such a great job with this, because Suzanne has a team of people and she sees herself as part of a team.
Right.
So what you need to do for the collaborator is say, wow, you all did some really great work. Each one of you contributed in a very important way. Well done. So they don't like to be called out individually, but they'll appreciate public recognition as long as it involves the team.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about a collaborator as a direct report relative to providing feedback and direction to them. This, and related to what Sarah just shared, feedback you want to keep informal and keep it very approachable. I mean, we've had some great episodes like with Jason Lauritsen about the check-in method. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for you to do this and realize that we can keep it informal, but very powerful. Look at things from a big picture perspective and be careful not to dwell too much in the details. It's not that they can't adapt to the details, but they could get lost in the details. And then when you think about their higher extraversion, that social nature, remind them, and this gets to your point about recognition, how much they're work impacts the whole. They're
Mm-hmm.
part of a greater whole, and they want to be seen as part of a greater whole. So that feedback and that input and direction should be tied to that for sure. Now, what about delegation? How do we delegate to a collaborator?
Well, John, here's what you don't delegate to a collaborator is a lot of detail-oriented technical work.
Okay.
The low formality makes them, kind of ill-suited to manage an abundance of details and information. So they're really more casual and flexible and spontaneous around delivery of work, and do delegate work that's collaborative and familiar. So the interesting thing is they can be very spontaneous and flexible, yet they like the consistency and they like the known. They like the known and what is familiar.
Right.
So that's where you really have your best opportunity to delegate, is in those places where they know the shtick, they know the routine, and they can manage that without having to get into the weeds, deeply into the weeds.
And again, in terms of coaching them, I think just building on what we've already talked about, you can ask how they use their approachable style for influence and network building. One of the other things that we like to reference is, of course, self-awareness is that they may be coming across as a little too informal or easygoing, and at times they need to adapt and convey a sense of urgency and intensity that may feel very unnatural, but this is part of how we don't remember. People don't change, but this is how you can coach them and help them adapt, because sometimes that urgency, that focus on detail, and people can adapt for a period of time for sure, but is necessary based on the circumstance. And then I would also say that guiding them through the fact that difficult conversations happen and that expressing unpopular opinions in a direct and frank manner are necessary. Also, if you are communicating with a person who favors that, I think you and I are like that, that's what they need. So that adaptation, coaching them toward the adaptation of the areas that perhaps can work as traps, will really be helpful. And one of the other things that you said, Sarah, that it just brought to mind, one of the things that you said that reminded me that when we talk about change readiness, the collaborator is actually in the largest group of what are called change challengers. So if you are instituting change, and if your reference profile is such that you are a change champion, the collaborator wants to know why. Just help me understand why we're doing this, and help me understand and coach me through this, and help me navigate this. And we'll learn more about that. You've heard us talk about the 3 different groups of change readiness. That's another one of the episodes. But collaborators being the largest percentage, chances are you have a you have a lot of collaborators in your organization. So these are all, whether it's a manager or a direct report, these are all helpful hints in order to understand how to work with them and to manage them.
I would just add, John, that they're a cultivating kind of pattern. By cultivating, you reference this employee and teamwork zone where collaborators live, and they think about the people. So they do all different kinds of work. They do the work very well, but they think about how the people are doing the work. And does everybody have a voice? Are we creating an environment where people can be successful? They have an eye and an ear on the morale and on the employee engagement. They become important. They can give us some good signposts for things that might be challenging for employee morale. But I do think to capitalize on a collaborator's superpowers, give them time to respond to things, give them knowledge and understanding. They may ask a lot of questions, give them some flexibility. Collaborators can bristle at authority in very specific direction, which is something I know a little bit about. I was driving with my mom the other day in the car, and she was like, turn here. And I'm always like, I know where to turn. Even if I don't, it's just automatic. So I think there's gold here with the collaborator. You just got to emphasize those strengths and help mitigate the kryptonite.
Well said. Absolutely. And if you're not sure, if you don't know what your reference profile is, go into the show notes. We always have a link there for you to complete the behavioral assessment. We'll send you your 1-page description of your reference profile. And if you're not a collaborator, keep listening, because over the next few months, all 17 of these reference profiles will be highlighted on the Bosshole Chronicles.
I was just going to end by saying, you know what? Because this reference profile is the most common,
Mhm.
chances are you're supervising one, you're sitting next to one in your management meetings, they're around you. So make use of this info.
Get to know who they are. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And get to know who you are. And that's what we do here on the Bosshole Chronicles. But Sarah, thanks for kicking this off with me, and keep checking in. We got some more reference profiles coming up.
See you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles.
Thanks very much for checking out this episode of the Bosshole Chronicles. It was so good to have you here. And if you have your own Bosshole story that you want to share with the Bosshole Transformation Nation, just reach out. You can email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you next time.